recording, Larry? There you go. Thank you. I will call the roll before we get into boilerplate. Dana Oviatt, unmute please so we can get an audible from you when I ask for your, there you go. Good. Dana Oviatt, say here.
Here.
Thank you. Blake Powell.
Here.
Beth Steele.
Here.
Okay, I'm Rick Smith. I'm the chairman. Larry Dunn is an elected alternate, also
Sure.
host of the meeting. And good, there's Nip Tanner. Can you unmute yourself, Nip? Nip Tanner, present, say aye or here.
Hi.
Okay, so those are your 5 elected commissioners: Dana Oviatt, Blake Powell, Beth Steele, Art Tanner, and myself. Okay, the next order of business is to read this infernal Zoom statement. This meeting in the Noank Zoning Commission will take place through Zoom remote meeting technology. My name is Rick Smith. I'm chairman of the commission. The host of the meeting is Larry Dunn, the alternate zoning commission member. Anyone speaking should state their names prior to speaking each time. Participants in this meeting will be commission members and staff, persons with applications for architectural design review that have been previously submitted for consideration, and the commission's counsel if he joins us. At the discretion of the chairman, with the concurrence of the commission, elected alternate members of the commission may participate during old business. Participants who would like to comment on an item or share a screen item, either use the raise hand icon or just wave your hand in front of the screen, or if you're off mute, you can simply get my attention by speaking. Participant will then have the opportunity to speak after being called upon by the chairman. We have not had feedback problems, so you don't have to mute your microphones until called upon. Procedurally, to offer a motion or second a motion, commissioners should physically raise their hand and be acknowledged. To vote, commissioners will be called upon individually by the chair to get an audio recording. Public can participate in the meeting as observers, and at the start of the meeting, in just a minute, we'll have a general comment section on the agenda at which issues not on the agenda can be raised for future commission consideration. During the general comments section, a member of the public wishing to speak will be asked to raise his hand, or we'll get an audio from him and no. We'll really have to look for the screen hand waving. Again, identify yourselves before speaking. Members of the public can also submit comments by writing to the commission after the meeting for consideration on any item discussed tonight. Finally, and most importantly, a recording of tonight's meeting, audio and video, will be posted on the Town of Groton's website within 7 days of the meeting. So if you missed something, or you know of somebody who wants to watch the meeting, has nothing better to do, that's where you find it. Okay, next item, general comments, issues not on the agenda. I do not see an awful lot of visuals of people who may want to speak in that. Can we get a gallery view, Larry, that has everybody, including those that are spectators? You're muted. There they go.
Click the upper right hand corner. You'll say view and click the gallery view.
Right. I see a whole lot of people that are on the right hand panel, but I don't see them on the screen. That's my problem. So I can't see if they're waving their hand to see if they want to speak.
All right, you're in speaker mode. If you hit view, you have speaker mode and you have gallery mode.
Gallery mode is checked off.
Well, it should be.
I just hit I can't get the command back, but it basically gave me everybody. So I'm good.
Okay.
Except most of them are not on visual, so I still can't see if anybody wants to speak. All right. Can you unmute everybody for the moment and see if anybody wants to,
They should be able to raise their hand,
okay, use
a
it.
little hand signal.
Raise hand icon, okay. And this is for general comments for issues not on the agenda. I don't see anything showing up, so I'm going to consider that no one has used that icon by now, so they're not going.
Of history, decades, centuries in the making. It was Dick versus Derek Chauvin, the police with the criminal legal system.
Okay, let's find out who that is in the background.
People have been denied due process and equal protection of law for so long. Trials can actually serve. There would be legitimate questions about when a police officer could ever be brought to justice for killing a black man.
I'm not sure where that's coming from.
You're on mute, Rick.
Hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
First application for design review, consideration of the application for a certificate of design appropriateness of David Kennedy, 124 Brook Street, to install a 14 by 24 foot shed. I'm going to unmute, ask David Kennedy to unmute, and if he does that, we will have him to give his presentation. Okay, he's unmuted. Dave Kennedy, you're on to describe your proposal.
Okay. First of all, I'm installing it's a pre-manufactured shed from Cloder Farms. It's a 14 by 24 shed. I actually sent the package. I can first let me orientate you where I live. 120 Brook Street. It's 124 Brook Street is off the main Brook Street on a lane. It's shown by a red dot. It's next to the fire district property. In between that property and the property of West Greenleaf, it's kind of behind Crosswinds Drive, and to the west is, I'm sorry, to the east is the Anderson property. So it is a ways off the road. I did include a drawing. The next one would be the street view. This is our property on 124 Brook Street. It's a large colonial. The property next to that is West Greenleaf. This is a property to the south. Again, it's a colonial as well, straight front. The next property, I don't know if you could raise it up a little bit.
Can you scroll up, Larry?
I did.
It's like the screen's frozen.
Hold on, 6 on 10. What are you seeing?
It's on 120 Brook Street. He wants to go to the next plate.
Yeah. I'm not sure why it's not moving. Hold on, let me stop share and restart it. What are you seeing now?
Black screen.
That's a dark screen.
Oh, geez. Well, it looks like we're having some internet problems. So I see it on my screen, but you're not seeing on your screen.
No.
Well,
All right, let me exit. Let me leave you in charge, and I'll exit and
All right.
try again.
See if it comes back up and I can start or continue with.
Yeah, if we get it up, we'll continue
Okay.
from where you left off.
Okay. We're just,
There you are.
there you go. Okay, so this is the property to the north, which is a fire district property. So it runs north to south, this fire district garage, my property, and then the property of the West Greenleaf, which is actually 120 Brook Street. So the property is off of a long driveway. I did throw this picture in, which is the view to the west, which is the Crosswinds property. Their property is actually a ways lower than the road, and there's a lot of trees, and there's kind of a break in between. So it's you can kind of only see their roof, so it's not as significant relative to the street view, even though what we have is really two colonials and a garage, and the shed is going to be a Cape style, so it should match the the property that's up there from the street, and it's actually not on Brook Street, Maine. I did show the next slide shows a picture of what the shed looks like. It's again a 14 by 24. This is actually a mirror image of the way it would look installed on the property. It's going to have the garage on the other end, just because of where it's going to be located towards the, it would be on the north side of the property. So therefore, to access the garage, you'd want to come from my property, basically. So that's why it would be a reverse. It does look a little redder in this picture. It's going to be barn red, so it won't be quite so bright. So it is 14 by 24. It's about a 14-foot high. It is called an elite Cape style. The higher pitch I chose because it matches the pitch of our house, which has actually a fairly high pitch. So I did it to fit in the view. This shows an area of our property, and it shows location. There's a little red square of where I'm going to put the shed in the back corner of the property. Let's see, and then the last one is, I tried to kind of Photoshop in to give it a little look of it. It was kind of crude. Actually, it was kind of a cut and paste. So it's actually going to be a little further back in the property than that, but it's probably about 20 feet off the rear wall of the property. The property is surrounded by walls in the back. On the side, there's fencing from the fire district property. I don't know if you had anybody had any questions about the.
Before we take questions, thanks, Dave. Let me add some information that Bill Mulholland provided to me after I asked. This is on the issue of setbacks, which were not clearly demarked on this. Bill says, I spoke to the applicant and checked the file. The site plan, which he submitted for my review and approval, did not have the setbacks delineated on the plan. However, I called him and discussed the issue. He is proposing a 10-foot rear and side yard setback. The code requires 6 foot. It allows for an additional 2 foot in height for each additional 1 foot in setback. His building is approximately 14 feet high, therefore it will comply with height and setback. So that's, I would ask you to consider that as part of the record because it is a question that came up on the initial review of the application. So having said all of that, commissioners, do you have questions for Mr. Kennedy? And here we go again. I have to look for people waving their hand. Okay, I don't see anybody waving hands, so no questions. All right. Then is there a motion on this application? Beth Steele. Got to get you unmuted, Beth. Oh, Larry, you have to make me a co-host again.
All set?
Okay, you can go now.
Okay. I move to determine that based on the potential impact on neighborhood architectural harmony and character, property values, historical integrity, and/or public health and safety, the level of review deemed appropriate for this application is a site plan review under section 2.26.6.5, and to both waive all specific submittal requirements that are not included in this application because they would not aid the commission in its determination of the application's compliance with section 2.26, and to accept the application as complete, and to approve the application of David Kennedy for a certificate of design appropriateness to construct a 14-foot by 24-foot shed at 124 Brook Street, Noank, because it meets the criteria set forth in section 2.26 of the zoning ordinances for the Noank Fire District.
Is there a second? Is there a second to the motion? I can't see.
I see Dana and I see Blake both seconded.
Okay. You guys are both muted. We're going to try and get that. I'd like commissioners to stay unmuted so we can get the audio. All right, so Dana Oviatt was a second. Okay, discussion on the motion. Could you take the agenda off for a minute, Larry, so I can see everyone? Thank you. Nip, discussion on the motion?
Yes, yet again, we have an application that does not meet our requirements. We do not have photographs of all buildings that are on property that is within 200 feet of the property under the proposal. And while our regulations don't require a site plan, with more detailed information than we have on this one, I think in any case where we have an application where buildings are being added to the property or the footprint of the building is being changed, I think that we need a plan. Doesn't have to be a surveyor's plan, but we need to have some kind of reasonable plan which shows all the changes that are being made so that there's a permanent record that ends up in the file.
Anybody else? Dana, Blake. All right, I have a comment. I agree with Nip that we need to look at this process. The 200-foot thing continues to defy rationale, and I took another crack at the instruction sheet, which Bill and I thought we had it right in January, and turns out it looks like we could add a couple of words and make it clearer. Applicants need to know that it's any structure on a lot that is 200 feet from the boundary of the subject property. And that means the structure itself could be more than 200 feet away. It could be on the far end of a lot, could be 300 foot away. Not so much to this application, but to that whole process. That's one thing I think needs to, we need to set some agenda time, maybe at our next regular meeting, to make sure we're all in agreement of what we ask for and what the forms say to ask for it. That's point one. Point two, the site plan, I think, is also a good idea. I don't think we say that loudly enough on the instruction sheet. We should. I'm going to make an observation or a comment now for everybody to understand why it's been a little bit hectic for a while, because it bears a little bit on this one and also on the next one. For those of you who don't know, Bill had a major medical event about a month ago. He had to be life-starred to Hartford Hospital. Unfortunately, they saved him. But he is on short hours in his day job. He's responsive to me with emails and things. And he's in rehab, several times a week and recovering nicely and still working some for us and some for his day job. However, that means I've been carrying a little bit more of this load, and between that and Zoom and the ability to get in and out of offices, it's made things a little bit hectic. The way I look at these proposals in the environment we're in right now is if we had everything we wanted a week before the meeting, just the way we ideally want it, would it change anything in our view of a proposal? Taking this one alone, my view would be no. Because if we got those extra properties on a map and with the photos and a site plan for a shed in the backyard of a place that's not even on the street that's called out in the regulations, I wouldn't need that additional information to influence my view. So I would ask you, maybe you think about it that way. Maybe you have your own view, of course. For this proposal, I would support the motion just because of that general waiver that we have. The level of review deemed appropriate for an application received by the commission is within the sole discretion of the commission. So we have the discretion to say, yeah, we ask for those things, but in a case-by-case basis, maybe we don't need it for a particular application. And I would say this is one of those that we don't need it. So that's my view on it. Anybody else, commissioners?
Can I ask you a question?
Dana, yes.
Dana Oviatt. So this is a naive question. The site plan is specifically to determine where on the property it's being located. Is that right?
Yeah, with relation to property boundaries and setbacks and so forth.
Okay, and that's all it's designed to do. There's no other hidden thing that I'm not thinking
When you
about.
ask that way, I'm not sure how to answer it.
Okay.
There may be something I'm not thinking of. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Nip may have an answer for that. Nip,
Tanner, Dana, the other thing that the site plan can do is show you the orientation of the house on the property. So you get a better sense of which sides of the house or the building in question face the street, face a navigable waterway, which are the two viewpoints that we're supposed to be thinking about when we consider the architectural suitability of the proposal.
good, thank you. Okay, other comments, questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the roll on this so we get an audio. Beth Steele,
Aye.
Blake Powell,
Aye.
Dana Oviatt,
Aye.
Nip Tanner,
Opposed, not because of the application, but because of the process.
okay,
This is the, I don't know, third or fourth time in recent memory that we have not adhered to our standards.
okay. And I'm a yes, so motion passes 4-0. Okay,
I think 4-1.
pardon me?
I opposed it.
Oh, I'm sorry, 4-1. I can't count, sorry.
Or are you making me invisible? One or the other.
Never, but I can't count. Okay, so Dave Kennedy, you can stay if you want, but you can leave and see Bill. You might even, well, depends on how fast you want to race down there. He has office hours till 7:30. You might get a permit from him tonight, but you probably won't. He's going to need some paperwork. So you'll have to see him next Tuesday during office hours to get a permit. Then you can take that to the town to get your building permit.
Okay, thanks very much. And thanks everybody for your time.
You're very welcome. Next application is consideration of the application for a certificate of design appropriateness of Peter J. Springsteel on behalf of Naples Marketing and Development, 39 Front Street, to remodel and convert a two-family dwelling into a one-family dwelling. Nip, your hands up before we get the applicant. So you got a comment first?
Yes, I am recusing myself as a neighbor.
Okay. Nip recuses, okay. We still have a quorum, so I'm not going to seat anybody for this. We'll just take it with the four of us. Let's see. I'm looking for Peter Springsteel. There he is. Peter's unmuted, but he's not on the screen. That's interesting. Peter, can you hear us?
I certainly can. You want to see me?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Body language and expressions count as communication.
Okay. So we might want to start with the photo board with all the neighborhood pictures. I think that was a separate file that I sent. Yeah, there it is.
Okay. All right.
And okay. So I don't know if you can bring it in a little bit so we can see the whole thing.
Rick, is there any way to enlarge the sharing?
You mean the document? Make it,
Yeah.
you
just
want
a
it
little-
bigger?
Yes, please, if possible.
I don't know. Peter
You
just,
want to bring it in. You want to bring it in so you can see the whole document.
yeah,
You gotta show pieces of the document.
that's interesting. This doesn't let you zoom down. You're just using a document off of software. Why can't, isn't there a zoom feature, the spyglass thing?
Yeah, I did zoom it in.
Oh, really?
You don't see the zoom?
The only other way to do it is put the participation along the top. Now you've got, are you seeing it now? It's in the center of the screen. You still can't see more than one property. All right. And Beth, you wanted it bigger anyway, so you could see words.
If possible.
Yeah. What do you think, Larry? Can you do that? And we'll just have to skip back and forth from property to property.
Right now I've got it zoomed in and you see one at a time.
Right.
So
Okay.
I'm on 7 Latham Lane, if you can see that. Is that what you're seeing?
Yep.
Like, I
So,
can
Rick,
still
if
make
you-
it bigger.
Yeah. Peter,
You know,
what do you have to say?
if you could scroll over to the right side of that board, we'll see some pictures of the existing house as a starting point.
Okay.
Keep going. There's a scroll bar at the bottom of the screen there. You can just grab that with your cursor. It might be easier.
No, I did. So I'm
No.
scrolling. There's going to be a delay.
Yeah. And then if you scroll down, you can,
There you are. That's the back of the building.
and then over to the right a little bit more. And down a little bit. The one that you can fully see now, that's 39 Front Street, which is the subject property from the back, sort of the back northwest corner looking towards the street. And if you scroll down to the next one, there's a photo of the front of the house. And you can see it's been somewhat neglected over the years. It's been added on to multiple times over the years as well. The building is obviously all shingled, and we've cleaned up or removed a lot of junk from the yard. So you're seeing dumpsters there. We also gutted the inside of the house because it just needed to totally be gutted out. If you now scroll back over, you can see, or to the left and up, we can see the neighborhood map. So you get a sense of the location of the property and some of the buildings around it. There's 49 Front Street, which looks like a newer building. 40 Front Street's a little newer building. That was good there. There's subject property in pink and all the houses within 200 foot of the property line. are included in there. And we have a pretty consistent mix of homes in this neighborhood that are historic looking. Even the newer ones have got a more historic appeal to them. Some of them very Greek revival-ish, and I don't know if you can randomly go through some of these photos here, might help. I think that house is newer, 40 Front Street, but shingled, and it's got traditional shapes to it. 49 Front Street, I'm not sure how old that house is. It might be pretty old, actually, but there's been some updates to it. If we go to the left, actually. '69 Main Street is actually the Baptist Church, which is up behind the property. And 49 Front Street is a newer building, but it's sort of in a Greek revival-esque kind of style. 36 Church Street is an older building, also Greek revival. That's the church again. Scroll back up maybe, or over, yep. 4 Latham Lane is across the street, diagonally across the street, and that's an older building, more Victorian in nature. And then 31 Front Street is a couple doors to the west, also very historic building. 7 Latham Lane, also diagonally across the street, a little more Victorian looking. And I think that's all the properties in the surrounding neighborhood. And then maybe we should go to the site plan, Rick, if you can find that. I think it's the one that had the 3D drawing. I think that was it there. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I could share the drawings on my screen and it might be a lot easier.
It worked better the last time we did that.
Yeah.
What do you say, Larry? Can you take me off share and put him on share and let him present the documents?
Yep, he can share.
Okay. All right.
Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Obviously, this house is in the RV zone, and that's why we're here before you to do the design review. This is a 3D drawing of the proposed changes to the house. This is the site plan. We're proposing to add a deck onto the front of the house right here. We are also proposing to add a single bay garage right here on the site plan. The rest of the footprint is pretty well intact to what is there today. There's a series of decks on the back of the house as well. This was a 2-family house, and we are proposing to convert it back to a single-family house. So we're going to remove the stairways that were on the back of the house because they're not needed now for egress from a separate apartment. So that should clean up the back a little bit. We are going to rebuild those decks. They're not really that visible from the street, if at all. You can see the side of this one a little bit, but we're going to basically put those back so that they're structurally sound. The deck on the front is going to be basically what's going to appear to be painted wood. It'll be painted PVC AZAC, and we'll have a traditional lattice at the skirt. Wood trim all the way around that lattice work, a fascia board, and then a traditional picket rail around the perimeter. And then this will lead us up the front steps to the front door. Interestingly now, if you were to look at the house, it didn't really have a front door on this facade, which is the facade that faces the street. The front door was on the side here, and then there was a deck here, kind of a 4-foot wide deck that led you into a door right on the side here. We're getting rid of that deck. We're getting rid of that door. We're gonna put a new side door sort of further back on the side. You can see it here with a little canopy roof, sort of a traditional thing with brackets. And that leads us down a landing and steps to get to the garage. So in the site plan, that's right here. You come off the steps, go down the walkway and enter the garage right here. The detached garage is one of those things we see a lot of in Noank, and it really, I think, enhances the texture of the neighborhood. There's a lot of outbuildings on Front Street, and this would continue that theme, and it's small scale. It's just a single bay garage. So it fits in with that sort of minimalist scale building, as opposed to the house, which is much larger. We're gonna redo all the siding on the house. There's essentially all shingles right now, if you recall. We're gonna propose using clapboards on the main body of the house, which is probably what was there originally. We're gonna have a little bit wider style corner boards and a frieze board that runs along the top of the wall. We're going to replace all the windows. We're going to be using a simulated divided light styled window. And we're going to have some doors on the front of the building here to access our deck and the front entrance. These dormers up here, which were probably added at a later date than the original building, there are actually many iterations to this building. From within, we can see a gambrel-shaped structure in the old framing, and it was tiny. So I think even this front end of this building was added on later on. You can see it in the foundation work as well. So in order to reduce the appearance of these dormers, which are probably not that appropriate, but they're there, is we're going to leave those in shingles. So those will kind of gray out and sort of fade away, as opposed to the more brightly covered clapboard that we'll have on the main body of the house. We're also tying the gable across at the eave, which you see a lot of in the Noank area. This also is a device to help scale down this building, which looks rather large and tall from the street. And then we'll have the same kind of treatments in the rear, where we have shingles on this upper dormer piece and clapboards on the lower piece, except for this one wall right here. So here we have the direct head-on elevations. This is the right side view, which faces east. New windows with the simulated divided lights. The existing windows are a hodgepodge of different modern windows. There's no dividing lights in them, so it's somewhat inappropriate the way it is now. This will help to bring it back to a more appropriate look. We're going to have architectural grade asphalt shingles on the roofs here and all through here. Again, you can see the clapboard siding, and then this is going to be the rebuilt deck system. This view here is the rear of the building from the west, and you can see this added section here that's already there. Somebody added it at some point in time. We're going to keep that shingled and all clapboards down the lower portion. And then you can see the back of the garage here. We're going to shingle the garage to give it also that sort of more rustic feel, which a lot of the outbuildings have in Noank. This is the left side south elevation, which faces that little garage. There's that side door, canopy and brackets. Clapboards on the base, big wider corner boards, and shingles up in the dormer areas. And again, you have your asphalt architectural shingles. Here we have a view of the garage from the house. Again, shingles. We're built into the hill there a little bit, so you're seeing some stepping in the foundation here, and the door into the side of the garage. And then the front east elevation of the two buildings together. We've got some board and batten in the gables here, which you see some of in Noank, but it helps to, again, to break up the size, especially of the main building here, and add some texture and interest to the garage building here. Garage door will have sort of a traditional siding with, again, simulated divided lights in the window transom at the top. We have floor plans here. I'm not sure you're interested in those so much, but we are, again, breaking this down to a single family from what was a 2-family, maybe even 3. I'm not sure if there were other apartments snuck in there at one time. So that is essentially a presentation for this property. Happy to answer your questions.
Commissioners, questions?
Dana,
When, Blake, okay, Dana first, then Blake. Go ahead, Dana.
Dana Oviatt, does the front deck replace a front deck that was already there, or I can't remember what was there before?
There is, as far as I know, there was no deck there. There was a deck on the side right here with a stair coming down here that we want to remove. There's also a Bilco bulkhead door, and you can kind of just see it's sort of shadowed, ghosted in there behind the lattice work. So you would see that bulkhead door and a brick foundation. That's what was there for at least the last bunch of years.
Okay, and my question is pretty naive. Does the house have to stay within the original footprint, or what are the rules and regulations on that? That's to anybody.
Well, I did a calculation of the lot coverage. And let's see, what was my conclusion here? It's lot coverage, the total allowable is 923 square feet. And that's based on your zoning sheets right here. And then you can, you can break off 10% for outbuildings or decks. I can't remember which. But
Peter, let's make sure we don't create a record that has a confusion point. It's actually 1,923.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did I say?
923.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Right.
And the bottom line of this lot coverage calculation is that we're at now 914 square feet. That includes the decks, the garage addition, canopy, the overhangs, pretty much everything. Again,
1,914. Just to make sure we have our numbers right in the video record.
I'm having trouble. So 1,914 square feet. So we're below the allowable lot coverage, and the existing lot coverage is 1,450 square feet. So we are increasing it, but we are within the regulation.
Dana, you good with that?
Thank you.
Okay. Blake Powell.
Yep, Blake Powell. Peter, on the part of our package too, we received the survey from Greg Fetus.
Yes.
And it shows the flood zone lines between, I think it's, I can't read it really well, that's why I'm really asking, is it relevant or not? But we show X, and I guess it's AE. And where does the FEMA rule kick in? What flood zone elevation?
Because part of the building, I think this corner of the building right here is in the AE elevation 10 zone, I believe.
Right.
But all of our living spaces and everything is above that elevation. So we comply with the FEMA regulations because of that. If our if our building was set lower and the finished floors were below that elevation 10, then there would be a lot of things we would have to do. But in this case, the building is pretty well elevated. Our mechanicals in the basement are elevated off the floor there. So everything really complies with FEMA in this situation.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, even though the footprint is over the boundary, as long as the elevation of the building at that footprint is above whatever the elevation needs to be, then you don't have to comply?
Well, we do have to comply because we're in the flood zone, but by virtue of the fact that where the building sets and the height of it, we comply with the FEMA regulations. There's nothing we have to do to the building to make it comply further.
Even with the 10-year look back number?
I'm sorry, what was that, Blake?
And with the way the 10-year look back applies and how much money?
Well, the building complies the way it sets. We don't have to do anything else to make it comply. We are spending more than 50% of the value of the structure,
Right.
but it still complies. You know, you're thinking of the situation where we might have to lift the building or
I'm trying to think of the situation on Spring Street that you presented a couple of months ago and why that was, you're cropping off part of the building in order to keep it out of the flood zone.
right, because they would have been in the VE zone and their finished floor would have been below the base flood elevation, which in a VE zone is much higher. So in essence, they would have had to lift that building up or just rebuild the whole thing in order to comply. Here, we're just in the AE zone, so they're not as stringent requirements and we're already elevated above the base flood elevation. So we're good.
Okay,
Really.
thank you.
Okay. Beth or Nip is recused. Okay, Beth, any questions on this? Okay, I have a few. Well, one of mine was the flood thing, but you answered that. You're not going higher. I notice your setback for the garage, you're within the house setback zone, but garages you get extra, and your site plan line looks like you're within the setback line for the garage. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, the garage, the accessory building setback is 6 feet on the side yard,
Yep.
and we're complying with that. The side yard setback for the house is 10.
Okay. And you did take down one structure, but then putting up the garage and all things working out, you're within the size allowance. That was another question. So okay, then I got my other questions answered by others. So, all right then, Commission, that's questions. What's your pleasure? Is there a motion? Beth Steele,
Beth Steele. I move to determine that based on the potential impact on neighborhood, architectural harmony and character, property values, historical integrity, and/or public health and safety, the level of review deemed appropriate for this application is a site plan review under section 2.26.6.5, and to both waive all specific submittal requirements that are not included in this application because they would not aid the commission in its determination of the application's compliance with section 2.26, and to accept the application as complete, and to approve the application of Peter Springsteel on behalf of Naples Marketing and Development for a certificate of design appropriateness to remodel the exterior of a home, and demolish a shed and construct a garage at 39 Front Street, Noank, because it meets the criteria as set forth in section 2.26 of the zoning ordinances for the Noank Fire District.
is there a second? Is there a second to Blake Powell? Okay. Um, Okay, that's the motion. Comments on the motion? Seeing none, I'll poll you. Beth Steele,
Aye.
Blake Powell,
I,
Dana Oviatt,
I,
I'm an aye, so that's 4-0 in favor. So Peter, you can go see Bill to get a permit, and you know his office hours, so I don't need to tell you
Okay.
that. All right?
No.
Okay.
Thank you very much, commissioners. I appreciate it.
All right. Before we leave this subject, not based on the applications, I want to see if commissioners, if you have any interest in me scheduling time on our May 25th agenda to talk over the things that about, are we asking the right questions? Are we getting the information? How do we ensure that? How do we be sure things that we decide we'll waive as not important? We've sort of set those out in advance a little bit in our minds. Obviously, those are case by case. A big house you might treat differently than a little outbuilding. So is it worthwhile having it on the agenda, or we just rather have me work with Bill and tighten up that instruction sheet to capture better what we're trying to get? Any thoughts? I see none. So I'll work with Bill and tighten up the instruction sheet.
Rick,
Yep. Nip.
Nip Tanner, one thing I think would be helpful if, as part of the instruction sheet, we included instructions on how to go to the Groton website, their GIS portal, where anybody with a computer can pull up the property map. They can zero in on theirs. They can blow it up so they can see it with dimensions. You could print it out. If you know, as in the case of tonight's application, you want to site a building or add a deck or whatever without hiring an architect, you can do that. And then we get what we need. And it's not that hard, but I imagine the average applicant doesn't know how to do that. But if we just gave them the instructions on how to do it, they could do it. And if it would be helpful, I'd be happy to write that up because I've done it multiple times.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'm sure there's no disagreement with that. So, okay, we'll do that too. Anything else on that, or we'll move to some of our remaining business? We have 3 sets of agendas, 3 sets of minutes to approve, and 1 zoning report. They all went out to you last week sometime, so you've had a chance to look at them. Are there any? I'll take them in order. March 16th, any corrections to be made? Seeing none. March 23rd, any corrections to that? I see none. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. April 8th, any corrections to those? Okay, I see none. So without object, Nip, you lit up, your square lit up. No, okay. All right, then without objection, we'll call all 3 of those approved. Is there any objection? Seeing none, all 3 are approved. The zoning officer's report for March had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Bill said it was getting very busy. He had 12 applicants in March. You've seen that. Any questions on the zoning officer's report? Seeing none. Okay, we'll, without objection, we'll call that approved. I don't see any objection. So that's that. Okay, we're now at old business. I would suggest, unless the commission disagrees, we take the SB 1024 bill in the legislature, an act concerning zoning authority, certain design guidelines, qualifications of certain land use officials, and certain sewage disposal systems. We take a brief discussion of that first. I got no takers on getting an expert here, so I had told you all the citation. You were free to look it up if you wanted to. I think a brief discussion first before we continue with the short-term rental issue would be worthwhile, because there are a couple of things that one bears on the other. So is there any objection to doing that one first? Okay. We don't have the document up. My fault. Nobody suggested it, and I didn't think of it till last night, and it was too late to put it on the website to meet the governor's thing. So we're going to have to go just on general measures. The two that stick out to me, there's a provision, and basically you can't argue with the purpose and the principles behind this. The point has been made very clearly that Connecticut over the years has become kind of a segregated state in terms of housing. And, to the extent that that can be fixed, that's a laudable goal. And I don't know that anybody would care to or need to argue with their goals. Their approach has some troubling elements of it in how it deals with zoning. It does take some zoning authority from local municipalities, and that's always troubling. When you think you have something that's working, even though other people don't, you kind of hesitate to have a state law passed to take away some of your authority. The larger things that are troubling, it has several provisions, one in particular, where as of right, which is a zoning term for you get to do it, it can't be rejected. Every single family home in a municipality would have the right to have one apartment, either a basement apartment or an attachment or a separate structure on the property. The law is a little bit inconsistent. At one point it says as of right, and it suggests they could just do it. But at another point it says there is a permit application and review process. So I'm not sure if anybody has teased that out. But clearly and right after that provision, there's another provision that says the municipality would still retain the right to regulate short-term rentals. So theoretically, everybody could have an apartment in their house, but the municipality would have a right to regulate short-term rentals. And why I thought it's worth talking to the commission about is, before we talk about short-term rentals, if this thing passes, recall we've always held that we'd like to allow people to remain in their homes. And that's why hosted rentals is an attractive proposition. If this law passes, every house can have an apartment, and we'd be in a position of saying either you can't do short-term rentals in it, which the law provides for, or everybody could have one short-term rental. Has some profound implications for how we've been approaching this and what happens if the law passes. So that's my introduction to this. I don't think Noank is going to make a jot of difference on approval of this. I think there are much bigger municipalities and concerned or not concerned, but they're going to weigh in, and what we say now doesn't really matter. And it's all going to get resolved by June. Either it'll pass or it won't, because the legislative session ends in early June. Oh, and the other thing it does, it limits the ability of a zoning commission to require more than, for example, more than one parking space for each one of those in-house apartments. Maybe that's not a problem when somebody has a large yard, but in a tight space, that could be another problem. So there are some concerns I have with the approach, but I don't have any problem whatsoever with the goal, which I think is laudable. So having said that, does anybody else want to comment on it, or we can just take that as information to keep in the back of your mind? Okay, then let's consider that information passed on. The other subject then is to talk about the short-term rental document and process for obtaining public comment. The document I sent out horribly late. It was on the website last week. I didn't think to send something to tell you that, but once you saw the agenda, you could have seen it. John only had one very minor change, just the citation number in one of the measures in the application materials. So the document exists as you saw it on April 8th. Larry and Dana have checked into the number issue on the front, and I'll ask one of them to talk about that. I mean, well, I'll just have them try and clarify where we are on that. Larry? The 25 versus 42 or whatever the other number was.
Yeah, Larry Dunn. The discrepancy gets into the point in time and the algorithms used by at least one of the companies looked over history that says on week X, it was in the system, on week Y, it wasn't. And then they did some algorithm in terms of the percentage contributions, and then kind of basically pumped up the number. If you look at a point in time and it's not advertised, then it wouldn't be counted. And so when Dana did the exemplary work of going through and doing it, I think last week, that was a point in time last week. So it's all a question of the definitions you want to use, on which were the total number that have at any point over the last 6 months been on short-term rental, or the ones that are currently being advertised as short-term rental. That's kind of the short form. There's a little more complications than that, but I think that's the kind of the short form that I saw in the differences. So the more conservative number would be the one that Dana came up with. It says, when you look at the snapshot today, here's what it says.
Now, can I add to that, Larry?
Yes.
Dana Oviatt? If the average Joe asks a question to me or you, how many short-term rentals are there in Noank, or how many people are operating short-term rentals? The more accurate number, in my opinion, is the number that I came up with, which is 26 or 27. Larry's right, and that's just a guess. Larry's right. My number is going into each and every single platform and figuring out how many people are renting. Their number is based upon correlating metadata, which I have no idea how that works. The other possibility is that they're overcounting in Groton Long Point or some adjacent area, because on their map, they have an area in the Northwest, which really isn't in Noank at all, and they counted that one. The other possibility is that they are multi-counting. In other words, there are at least 3 or 4 people who are running short-term rentals, which are on 2 or 3 different platforms. So if you count those all together, you come up with a higher number than what you'd actually come up with if you just counted singly each and every single one.
I guess I could take between what both of you said. Rick Smith, sorry. I'm my own worst enemy in that regard. I could take that as meaning the number will be refined over time, and it could be between 25 and 40 something, probably closer to the high 20s. And for purposes of ballparking, it almost doesn't matter. If we remain committed to the fact that short-term rentals are a concern and we need to regulate them. The number itself kind of doesn't matter, but I think those numbers will converge over time as we get a better sense of how things are done. Anybody else? All right. Well, we have a couple of things we could do and a couple of things we should do, in my opinion. We could approve this for going out for public comment at this meeting. And for planning purposes, maybe that's something we ought to do. The things we should really talk about, again, my opinion, is the best way to get the word out, the way we think we ought to get comment from the public. Those are all things. Dana has rightly made the point that the fire district mailing list covers about half of the household. Somehow I'd love to be able to, get to all of them so that everybody knows what's coming up. They all have an opportunity to comment or not as they see fit. I don't want to go through a public meeting and have people come in a week later and say, I had no idea this was going on. I can't imagine anybody doesn't know what's going on this subject in Noank, but it could happen. So how we communicate to them is an issue that we ought to brainstorm, and tonight would be the night to do it. The other thing is I had sent out the straw man under the FOIA exemption for preliminary drafts. We've all had a chance to see that. I did not put it up on the OneDrive. Nobody seemed to suggest that we ought to. So we can talk about it in principles, but we can't put a document up to look at. So having said that, two subjects: approve this for public input and talk about how to get that input. What's your pleasure?
Rick?
Dana, yep.
Dana, I'm going to be a troublemaker here because my opinion has changed slightly in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I'd like to force some discussion about whether we should go to a workshop before public hearing. And can I talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
One assumption for having a workshop seems to be that if we explain to the public the rationale and background of the document we have written, that they will be more receptive to the proposal. And to me, the assumption also seems to be that having a workshop will elicit all sorts of helpful comments and constructive criticism and alternatives to the way we have written the present document. I think it's really unlikely in the extreme to assume that the public will be swayed in the least over any explanation that we have to offer them for drafting the proposal in the way that we have. The public has had a chance to listen to all our deliberations over the last 2 years. Over the last 2 years, we've received many good letters, both for and against regulating short-term rentals. I pay attention to these letters. Sometimes I read them 2 and 3 times. But from the tone of the letters, I believe that people have made up their minds about whether they want STR regulation or not. And although there have been 2 letters that have called for a compromise, neither one of the letters offered any concrete suggestions as to specifically how such a compromise would be accomplished. What makes the commission think? What makes us think that the tenor of the workshop will change in any way from the tenor of the letters that we've already received? And finally, even if there were helpful suggestions about how to change a document, how would the commissioners be willing, how much would the commissioners be willing to change this at this late hour? And based upon the committee's 2-year history of deliberating just this latest document, any substantial changes would take many, many months. And that's why I would like to move that we dispense with having a workshop and proceed directly to having a public hearing.
That's a formal motion.
Yes.
Okay, is there a second?
That's Steele. I'll second it just for the purposes of eliciting discussion on the
Okay,
motion.
all right, it's proper motion made and seconded, so discussion on the motion. Beth, since you give you
I'll
first.
defer to Blake. He can go first.
Okay, Blake, comments on the motion.
Sure, Blake Powell. So I think Dana raises a good point. I would note that he's using the term workshop, which when we initially discussed this whole process, that's how we were characterizing it. And then lately it's turned into just a public meeting for public comment. And that's what we've been getting in the letters and the written comments. But I always thought the idea of a workshop had merit if it would allow us to craft a regulation that balanced the different opposing views in a fair way. But if it's not organized correctly and moderated correctly, I'm not too sure we're going to get that kind of value out of it. I've always also had concerns about the Zoom format and how effective and fair that it would be to do a workshop over Zoom. So if it's turned into just a dry run for a public hearing on these regulations, I agree with Dana that we may as well just go for a public hearing at this point.
Okay, others? Yeah,
Yeah, I have thought that over. I mean, we've received a ton of letters, and I can't imagine that what people are going to say at the public workshop is going to be substantially different than what they've already submitted. And I do have concerns. I mean, I'm all for constructive comment as to how to make the regulation better. But, just having a complaint session or a session where somebody says you have to regulate it or you can't regulate it doesn't really, I think it's not going to add anything to what we've already done. And I think Dana also makes a good comment. I mean, the public's entrenched on these issues. And quite frankly, I think some of the commissioners are also entrenched in their views. I feel like we're just spinning our wheels. We're allowing the public to say something and it's not necessarily going to make any difference. And maybe we should just go right to the public hearing.
others? Nip?
Nip Tanner. I haven't read all of the most recent letter submittals, but I went through the first batch and I started to develop a spreadsheet to capture the primary message that each one was trying to deliver. And my strong feeling at this point is that we've heard from the people and their friends who are operating short-term rentals in violation of our regulations. In that early batch, there were only a couple letters that supported our efforts to rein in those operations that are in violation of our regulations. And from a few conversations, things I've overheard walking around the village, I think there's a much larger percentage of the population that is very concerned about short-term rentals that we haven't heard from. And when they've expressed that to me, I've said, you will have your chance. There's a workshop. And my hope is if those people have concerns that are similar to mine with the current draft, that if enough of them take advantage of the workshop, submit something in writing once the draft is out there and we're inviting comment, and maybe they even take the opportunity to speak, that the commission will have a different perception than it has today about how the public feels about where we are based on the fairly one-sided set of communications that we've already received. So I think there is value in providing a forum. The alternative obviously is to go straight to public hearing, and then we get that feedback that we could have gotten at the workshop when there was still time to react to it. And if at the public hearing, without a workshop, we get a lot of pushback against the limited regulation that we're proposing, it'll be too late to try and modify it before we go to a public hearing. We'll be back at the same place we were 3 years ago.
Okay, Lynn or Larry? Lynn?
I think that the workshop is a good idea. I think that the public has been led, we have seen comments where people said, it's been a long time since we've been able to have any input. And so then finally you're going to have a workshop where you can. I think it's also good to set the stage and to really talk about the goals of this regulation and why those were important. I think it's important. The letters have had a lot of factual errors in them, to clean up some of those. And then to ask for the comments to be, just tell them that tell the public that when they make suggested changes to the regulations, they still have to be, for the commission to really consider them, they're going to have to be in agreement with the goals. So if you think that this is not a good way to do it, then you would be willing to do it this way. That's the kind of feedback that's really, really useful to the commission. And I can't say, yeah, it may be 90% is just, complaining about things and things we've already heard because we have read the letters. But, 10% of them might be really, really good. And there may be some themes that come through. I don't know if there will be, but if those would be things that we could make changes that would, in response to the public at that point. I may be idealistic, but I think it would be a good idea to try.
Hey, Larry, you want to weigh in before me? Larry?
Yeah, Larry Dunn. Everyone has a valid point. I agree with Blake that says it's a tougher environment in a Zoom meeting to have a workshop, and there are platforms to do that. We don't have them. However, to Dip's point is that there's a lot of, to your point, there's a lot of people that are kind of on the side that perhaps haven't participated. And by having a workshop, and I'll get back to that in a second, it provides more advertisement, more communication, the ability to get the word out, so that you get 2 bites at the apple in effect. But I think Lynn has a very good point, and it gets back to Blake's point, is how do you manage it so that we get valid input? I think given it's not a formal public hearing, I think the commission can say, this is the input we want. There's a proposal out there. You need to respond to the specific elements of the proposal. You just say, this section I disagree with, I recommend this, or I disagree with it, take it out entirely. But try and get specific feedback rather than generic, I think we should eliminate all short-term rentals, or I think we should have no limits on short-term rentals. So we need to get specific. I think if we do that in a workshop forum, we have the ability to kind of craft the feedback we get. Worst case, I think it gets the word out and the advertising out. So when you get to public hearing, you'll get, to Nip's point again, you get more people that would then participate in the process. So as much as I would like to skip the darn thing, I think there's that on the balance, it seems like having a crafted workshop would add value given the lengthy time we've invested in this thing.
Okay. I think that was everybody except me. Here's my views. If we don't have an informal public input session of some kind after months of saying we're going to do that so that people would have a maximum opportunity to influence the outcome, which they won't have in a formal public hearing process, will be pilloried rightly for pulling the rug out and saying, yeah, we told you for months that you're going to have an opportunity to comment, and now we're saying no. So I think that's, that's an idea I would not support. The whole workshop versus public hearing format, I talked to John some about this, and usually commissions, when they get to this stage of things, they want to entertain comment to them as opposed to roundtabling something. We kind of did a roundtable back in August and September of 2019 when we had those two well-attended meetings, and people talked to us, we talked to them, and we did that. And it's taken us 18 months to exhaustively go through all of the views we can think of and come to where we are now. So if a workshop means going back to a round table, which the public will see as their opportunity to get us to start over, I would avoid that. I think we need to tell them what we want them to comment on. I agree with that part of the suggestion, but we need to maintain it as a public input meeting where they comment to us. You can't stop them from getting to the proverbial microphone and saying, don't do this. And I'll bet you 95% of what we get is, the big disconnect between where we are after all our 2-year planning effort and their position is so far apart that we'll get 95% of the comments saying, you don't have any basis to do this, don't do it. And I'll listen and I'll say, thank you very much for your comment, but they have to understand we've moved on from that position 2 years ago. They will be upset. They can be upset, but the commission has moved on and gone through this planning effort because we think there's a threat here, and we're authorized as elected commissioners to deal with it by zoning if there is such a way to do that. So I think the public hearing format is probably better than trying to roundtable something, if that's what a workshop means. I would really urge us not to make any kind of a decision, even on what kind of a meeting we have or whether we have it, just on the basis of the letters we've received. I think I agree with Nip wholeheartedly. There's a whole bunch of people who would like to comment on this. There's a whole bunch of other people that probably still aren't aware of where this is, what it all means. They may have heard a little bit about it, but they have a life and they're doing other things. And that's why it's so important, as Dana said last meeting, to get the word out as broadly as we can so that everybody has an opportunity to comment. John's view is very clear on the letters we received. They're good expressions of the views of the person submitting the letter. They have nothing to do with the public input process because we have not announced to the whole public that we're soliciting comment on this proposal. Until we do that, those letters are just the writer's views. When we announce and we have a public meeting, if we do, or we solicit written comments, and I framed out one way of doing that in that straw man. Basically, that starts the clock on comments. They can resubmit their letter or they can write it differently, but until we've given everybody, pro and con, everybody in Noank, a fair opportunity to comment to us, to make a change in decisions or approaches, would leave us open to some criticism that we've forestalled some people being able to comment. So I would urge we not do that. I agree with Lynn that, that other 5 or 10%, I'm hopeful we're going to get some people to say, I don't like what you're doing, but if you're going to do it this way and not that way. And I think we need to give the public the opportunity to tell us that. If 100% of the people say don't do it and they don't give any constructive suggestions, well, that's unfortunate. It's a waste of a couple of hours of our night, but then we move on and say, well, we asked and they didn't have anything. But I think we owe it to the public to give them the opportunity. And that's why I like the idea of structuring it more and telling people, we're asking for comments on these provisions. Please direct your comments to those provisions. How would you do it differently? If you really think it shouldn't be done, say so, but don't just say you don't like anything, because we'll thank you for your comment and we'll move on. So maybe we need to spend some time on how we get them to understand what it is we want them to provide, as well as how we get the word out to everyone in Knowing. So I oppose the motion because I think it would defeat our purpose. Others, or everybody's spoken? Dana?
Yeah, I came prepared to defend this motion to the hilt, but Rick makes a good point that we would be pilloried if we'd been talking about this workshop for a while, and I think he's right. I think Larry's right that it's a good idea to get as many people to participate. So I wish to withdraw the motion.
Okay, is the seconder agreeable to that? Okay, so the motion's withdrawn. Okay. I sure do wish I had put that straw man up there, because the kinds of things, I can't remember all the kinds of things I had in there. It's getting word out to no anchors. Oh, and I had a lot in there about where I see us in a timeline or a schedule. I honestly don't see how we can have this public meeting before early June if we're going to have a justification as part of a public hearing presentation that explains clearly to the public what we're doing, why we're doing it, answers some of their repeated questions. I mean, John has always said to me, don't answer individual letters, because then other people of different views, they don't have the benefit to see that, and you get yourself in trouble. So much as I've wanted to write letters, I've trusted his advice on this. He says the time to answer the questions is when you're in a public meeting. This will be the public meeting, and I would rather answer as many of those questions at an informal public session than at the front end of a public hearing when we haven't received comment yet for over a year. So if that schedule is acceptable, we would take a few weeks to figure out how to have a coherent justification. I think we all know what we think it ought to say, but getting it down so everybody agrees with it will be the challenge. That could take a few weeks. And then May is kind of blocked by the annual meeting, and then we have a regular meeting on the 25th. We want to give people enough time. Once we announce the informal meeting, we want to give them the document so they have it in plenty of time that they can read it. So, you're talking about a couple of weeks in there. You really end up, we're at late April now, you end up at early June. So the only way to push that and try and have the meeting before the third week of May would be to go without the justification at all and just go there and let people ask us questions, let us answer them, but we probably wouldn't get very many good concrete counter proposals on these measures if we spent all night answering questions like, why are you doing this? And how many complaints did you get, which is irrelevant, and where did they occur, which is also irrelevant. I mean, there are a lot of things that are pent up in the public. I would like to deal with them in writing and get them out of the way rather than take most of an evening to answer things like that. So unpack that. There are two things, the schedule and how to deal with the justification. Anybody have views on those?
Rick,
Yeah.
it's Dana Oviatt.
Yep. Dana.
So when you say justification, okay, I see. And history, okay, it's history and things like that. I guess I'm asking for an operational definition of justification and what could be included in it.
Well, again, I'll use 2 or 3 examples of the kinds of things. We've probably gotten 30 questions over the years. Most of them really we don't need to answer. People are entitled to ask questions. We're not obligated to answer them. Some of the fundamental ones are, explain to us why you're doing this. And, we've talked about it in committee meetings, but we've never really answered people with that question. I think we have a great answer, but it has to be written down and either read to them or presented in writing so that they get it. If they want to argue with it, they're going to argue with it, but we at least have to have an answer to that kind of question. People keep harping on a few things. How many complaints did you get? Where did they occur? Neither one of them are relevant because, John pointed out to me, we could actually have done this without one complaint. All we would have had to done is see a couple of news articles or internet stories that troubled us for us to be proactive and say, this is not a good idea if it ever comes to Noank, we should have an ordinance change. We would be justified to do that. So whether we had 1, 10, 20 complaints is just not relevant. But the public needs to hear that, not the people who may still be listening to this meeting, because that's only partial. All the members of the public interested in the subject need to hear those kind of answers. And where they occur is also irrelevant, simply because just because it didn't happen on Pearl Street this year doesn't mean it won't happen there next week or next year or any other street in Noank. Zoning rules have to regulate uses, not users. So if it's a concern anywhere, it could happen anywhere, and we have to write the regulation that way. The public is not there yet. We keep getting letters saying, you've never told us where these occur. They deserve an answer, and they may not like how I answer it, but they deserve an answer. And I would prefer to do that in writing in a package that goes out and says, here's what we're proposing, here's why we're proposing it, here's some answers to the common questions asked. They're going to say what they're going to say in a public forum, or they're going to write it to us no matter what. And the best example of that is we still have not had detailed critiques of the measures in the proposal. We've had a lot of people say, we don't want you to do this, but they haven't focused on individual proposals. What they focused on is page 1, the history and statement of the issue. Is it 25 people or is it more? Is it, it's remarkable how many people complain about a document, a page that's not even going to be part of an ordinance. Again, answering those questions in advance in writing, I think, can go a long way to keeping us from wasting time in a public meeting or a public hearing, trying to answer those orally and then maybe getting pushback. But my opinion.
I agree with what you're saying.
Okay, thanks. Let's try and take this in 2 parts. There's a schedule and how we get the word out to people that we want to comment. That's kind of one, and how to solicit. And the other is the whole issue of how to deal with the justification. So does anybody disagree that it doesn't look like we'd be having this public meeting before first week of June? Again, the only way not to do that is to ignore the need for the justification. I won't repeat what I just said, but I want to give you the choices so you can think about options.
I think we should have, Lynn Marshall, I think we should have the justification, and I think the first week in June is fine.
Okay, anybody disagree with that? Seeing none, so let's use that as our tentative choice on that for now. So then the justification, it's hard not to talk about it in a document sense. So when I open things on my own screen, do you guys see it? Like, do you see a document there?
No.
You're not supposed to, so you shouldn't. I'm just doing it so I can remind myself. Yeah, okay. This is all still process questions. I had some suggestions in there, like 3 minutes per speaker. I had an option in there for someone who represents clients to get more time as long as their clients didn't also get their time, just so people wouldn't take 2 bites of the apple. That's poor planning on my part. I should have put the darn thing up there anyway, even if people didn't say do it. Yeah, and I had another thought to try and put boards on the written comments that would come in, so that we set a date 10, 14 days before the public meeting and say any letters received after that will be sent to the commissioners 3 days before the meeting, so they have a chance to read them. But if we get one a day before, I don't want to pile on something that some people don't have a chance to read. So I would want to tell the public, here's your window to submit. And I would also give them some time afterwards where those late letters arriving the day before the meeting, plus anything received, let's say in the 5 days afterwards, those would be in the record. But then we'd close it off. We'd start at time definite, we'd end at time definite. That's the record. So we're not just dragging it out and getting last minute things and bogging us down that way. And again, this is for an informal meeting, so we can set whatever sideboards and rules that we want. So anybody have a view on any of that? The lawyer option, the 3 minutes per person, the sideboards on written comments? Blake?
Yeah, Blake Powell. So Rick, one of the things you had in straw man, which is what brought up my comment before also, was you say there's alternating comments of people for and people against it. And I just think that terminology isn't going to be helpful in providing specific information about these regulations.
So should we take all in favor and then all opposed, or just take them at random when people's raise hand icon goes up? Assuming this is
wouldn't be interested in comments that are just generally speaking in favor or opposed. I'd prefer to hear comments that are specific to the regulation that we have.
Yeah, and Larry Dunn and Rick, I think, normal hearings or normal public sessions, there's a sign-up list, right? So, to Blake's question, you sign it up. Whoever signs up, you already put them in. So it's not a free-for-all. There's a sign-up list. You do it, if you're not on the sign-up list by, again, your date specific, then, you're at the end of the list. And if there's time, we'll get to you, all right? In terms of, but I think if you do it that way, then you avoid the pros and cons, but also the guidance that says, here's the feedback we're looking for. Provide the reference statement in the ordinance or the proposed ordinance. And yes, I agree with the 3 minutes. But I don't think we need to get too draconian in the rules beyond that. You got the time limit, you got the sign up sheet, you got the time limit, and you've got the direction. At least people are going to use the time however they want, but the direction says, here's what we're looking for.
Yeah, okay. Anybody disagree with that? Okay. Any other comments before we talk about the justification? Actually, 2 things: justification and how else could we get the word out? Yeah.
So I was just thinking with respect to getting the word out, obviously you can post it at the firehouse, which I suppose we already do, but maybe a sign that says, look, please send your email address to Sue or Nancy or whoever has the master list to get added so that you can receive comments or receive notifications as to, the upcoming schedule for this regulation. And then also post it on the park, post it at Carson's, post it at the liquor store and the mothership, I guess. And maybe post it down at, the two marinas too, because I think they have bulletin boards down there. At least that way it may reach some people. And other than that, we don't have any other community bulletin boards. But that at least is a start.
Posting other public places is a good idea. I hadn't thought of that, including marinas. Larry.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea, Beth. I would also propose and then volunteer is that the Town of Groton website has a news section at the front end that we could post the fact that we're having this session. It could have a link to the OneDrive where whatever documents you want are there. You could have a reference to Beth's point that says, hey, sign up to the Noank thing, and that could be on there for a month, right? And I would, since I've been working with IT and the town to, for other purposes to get on there, I volunteer to support doing that. If you provide the material, I can get it up on that website. The other thing is that I do know that the day is not considering, I think they've already decided they are going to have it either one article or a series of articles on this topic. And that's another mechanism to kind of generate interest around that date. So I think we would have to be proactive in or participate in that article to get the date out there, the mechanisms and how to get input from or to the commission as part of that process. So I think by doing all those things, I think that kind of gets back to Nip's point about getting the word out to as many people as possible. I'm trying to think of anything else we could do other than going to door and hand out flyers.
And just, I'm sorry,
Go
and
ahead.
that's Steele. And also, I want to just tack it on a few of the telephone poles or people walking around, they'll
That's it.
look at it.
Just
Right,
say-
at least in the village,
I think it's illegal. Just
Is
say
it? Okay, well then, forget I said it.
telephone pole linemen don't like climbing up and have their spike go into somebody's nail or something, and then they fall to the ground. And I was told that once. I don't know if it's true, but
Okay, then I
Yeah.
withdraw
people
that.
do it all the time. I get that.
We'll stick on the no parking signs. How's that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody reads those. Here's a couple of points. I have refrained. Well, actually, John has advised me not to send an article to the day because we're the applicant in this case, and he wants to make sure that, we have our point of view that we've determined and we've voted for it, but it's important that we not send something that sounds like advocacy. And I know that's not being suggested. I see you, Larry, but let me finish.
Yep.
So it would have to be very information. Our involvement in such a thing would have to be information based. We've done this development for 2 years. We're going to have a public meeting. Here's the document. You can read it, but not make statements about that sound like advocacy. We need to, and it ties our hands a little bit, but that's the way it goes. We're the applicant. So he has advised me that way in the past. My view on the newspaper and even the town website is I want to be sure we get comments from Noank residents and property owners. The more we go outside Noank to communicate this thing, likely to have people that want to speak. And I guess I would ask the commission, are you in agreement that it should be residents and property owners that are the ones that get to comment? And I would also say a representative of Noank residents or property owners. John says you always let attorneys, speak on behalf of their clients. It's just, he's never heard of a case where you don't do that. So you recall Ford's, I mean, they took most of the time. So is the commission in agreement that we should try and limit it to residents and property owners? I see a couple of thumbs up and a couple of nods. Okay, so we'll approach it that way, which makes me wonder whether participating the day they start to look for interviews on this subject, I would want to talk to John about that, as if there's a way to do that without putting us in some position to be criticized that I can't anticipate. Kind of the same thing with the town website. I mean, yeah, we're part of Groton, but do we actually want town residents that are exercised over this whole issue to come and want to speak? And then we say, well, okay, tell us your legal residence, and if it's not in Noank, you can't speak. We'll get more of those if we publicize this outside Noank. I like the idea of sending a notice to the marine, or putting a notice up at marinas and cartons and, every other place where the public walks by, the package store and the food market. I'm a little more leery about the town's website and the day, but again, just one opinion. Others? Yeah, Larry, sorry.
Yep, no problem. No, I did not suggest that you provide an interview per se. It was to advertise as part of that, the input would be, we are going to have a public comment and here's what has to be done. And when I mentioned before about a sign-up sheet, the sign-up sheet has your name and your address. And, if we did do something, let's say using the Town of Groton website, we'd say, this public session, anybody can listen to it, but the only ones that we doing comments would be residents of Noank. I mean, I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that. We're just trying to find additional ways to get the word out. If somebody doesn't like that, that's not our problem. I mean, this is a Noank issue. We are part of the Town of Groton, a significant part of the Town of Groton, I should add, I guess.
Well, they may disagree with you, but we certainly feel we are. Okay, other points on this, the how to get the word out question. Yep.
Dick Tanner, I agree with Larry and the other suggestions about doing it as broadly as we can. And I think as long as the notice says we are soliciting input only from Noank residents or property owners. And if you're one of those, with a sign-up sheet, which I think is a good idea, we can filter it. And when we call on people, we only call on people that have a legitimate right to participate under those rules.
Right. Wow, what's that? You know why we're getting, is everybody hearing that, or is it just me? Everybody is, yeah. All right. Okay. All right, well, it got fixed. Okay. In lieu of waiting for minutes, although Sue gets these turned around pretty good, tonight or tomorrow, I'm going to make up a list of my recollection and my notes of the things we've talked about here. I'll get it out to people to see if I've made an error. We can't comment on it or make decisions by email, but we can certainly send it out as a staff draft. Make sure I captured everything right. You can tell me if I've made a mistake and I can make that change, just to honor the public discussion part of the whole rules. So we haven't yet talked about the nature of the justification. When I talked to John about this, ordinarily, all such things are discussed in public. It kind of ties our hands behind our back, quite frankly, if we debate things in a justification in public, and people who are inclined differently than we are, then all of a sudden have all sorts of ammunition to offer comments on why they think something ought to be different. Which is why when I batted it around with him, the thought was, if I were to make a good faith effort to put something together and get it out to people, and they said, yeah, I'm good with using this with no changes, it's good enough, or no, I want to debate it in public, that might give us the opportunity to have something that we could then use to put our best foot forward. But if you thought it was worthwhile of debate, we would have to do that in public, and we'd lose the opportunity to put our best foot forward, but you'd have the ability to make it read and make the answers more to your satisfaction. So he thought that approach, without debating in emails, but just saying yes or no, would be consistent with his view of, you know, how the laws are intended to work, you know, with respect to FOIA and, you know, zoning commission rules. So does anybody have a view on that? You want me to give it a try, and you can always say, no, I don't like this, we'll debate it, or would you rather just start at some next meeting and start discussing ways to justify things? Blake?
I'm fine if you take an initial crack at it, and if nobody likes it, we'll start over with a public debate about it.
Okay, any disagreement with that? Seeing none, unless everybody's screen froze at once. Nip?
You're on mute, Nick.
You're muted, Nip. Okay.
Here we go.
Yep.
Sorry, Nip Tanner. I'm fine with a first start, and my assumption is based on how well you've tried to balance the points of view in all of our work, that it seems to me that it will be helpful if this preamble includes mention of issues that we've heavily debated and come to a decision on, but don't necessarily represent what our final decision will be after we go public. We just acknowledge in this that we are trying to balance a variety of considerations and mention all the considerations. And then say, having done that, after a lot of work, debate, whatever, votes, not all of which were unanimous, this is where we are. And just set it out that way. And not have to try and justify why is it 45 days, or, you know, why is it unlimited number of short-term rentals and so forth. Just acknowledge that those are issues, and at the moment, this is where we are on those issues.
Any disagreement with that? Okay, seeing none. This will be why it'll take 2 or 3 weeks to do this, because there'll be a lot to unpack. That's a really good idea, because people will have questions on things we didn't do as much as things we did do. So we should say something about that. Okay, so that's a justification, that's a schedule, that's getting the word out. Does anybody have anything else to add to that list? Anything else we haven't discussed? Okay, seeing none. Any other business? Seeing none. Motion to adjourn.
Um,
I'm
Point
sorry.
point of order.
Wait a minute, Larry Dunn, before we, Larry, another point to discuss?
It was just a point of order. I wasn't sure through the discussion whether you wanted me to pursue the option of anything on town website or not, because I heard both sides of that discussion.
Yeah, I guess we left that kind of open. What's your pleasure, commission?
What was Larry's question? What was Larry's question again?
He wants to know if he should pursue having an announcement on the Town of Groton website at the right time. Nip said yes. Right? Lynn,
Blake's fine with it.
Blake's fine with it. Beth, did you wave your hand? You're okay with it? Okay. All right, Dana's okay. All right, we'll do that. Yes. Okay, and I thought I saw a hand for, oh, Dana,
So I have Dana Oviatt. I have a question which is apropos of nothing. And it's just to ask what the policy is when people make applications to the commission for houses and changing houses. What's the policy on having public input from next door neighbors and such?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Somebody applies to change their house?
Does the public, for example, on the house, the Chafee house down the street, does the public have an opportunity to comment before we vote?
I think if I understand you correctly, and if I understand what Bill has said, a regular house can be a single family house. So if that's a two-family house and it wants to be converted to a one family, you don't have to ask permission for that. If you go the other direction, you do. Because of the way the zoning reg is written, you can't just make a one family into a two family without meeting certain criteria. And I suspect that might generate a public comment or public hearing. I don't know what the process would be.
Okay, but during our process of adjudicating these applications, ordinarily the public doesn't have an opportunity to speak, the right to speak. Is that correct?
Right. In the Chafee house, the Naples marketing and development thing that we heard tonight, I think Peter Springsteel just went into Bill's office a month or 2 months ago with an application to do interior remodeling, and it was nothing more than that. And he pointed out that they were converting it from two family to a one family, but we didn't even see that in design review. That was just Bill issues the permit so they can go and get a town building permit, and whatever the criteria Bill has to follow for an interior remodel, it has nothing to do with us in terms of design review. I would presume if that application to do interior remodeling and change from 2-story to 1-story required the commission involvement and public input, Bill would have denied it and sent it to us. So I'm guessing a little bit here, but.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Anything else or a motion to adjourn? I can't believe you guys want to. Blake Powell. Blake Powell, motion to adjourn second. Beth. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you all. Good meeting as usual. Appreciate it. Adjourn at